AI is already in our lives in so many ways. I think one of the competitive advantages, certainly of our company and any company today that's going to be successful, is embracing change and thinking about how you can operate with agility and thinking about how you can adapt quickly to some of these changes. But then our job is to sort of figure out, how do you use the power of the human mind to do the things that the machines can't do? Really trying to adapt quickly and put ourselves in that position of embracing in a positive way what the changes are. And I think that's just the way it's going to be.
Prominent CEOs, leading economists, iconic investors, insights from the experts. The Walker Webcast with Willy Walker. See who's next.
Welcome to another Walker Webcast. It is my real pleasure to have Andi Owen join me today. I'll do a quick intro of Andi, and then we will dive into our conversation on furniture, the built environment, growing her company, going from domestic to global, and a whole lot of other things. Andi Owen is the president and CEO of MillerKnoll, a global home and office furniture company and brand collective known for its timeless and iconic designs. As CEO, Andi leads the company's worldwide operations, encompassing 11,000 team members and $4.1 billion in revenues, and oversees MillerKnoll's strategy to catalyze industry transformation and redefine modern design. Andi played an instrumental role in bringing legacy brands Herman Miller and Knoll together as one brand collective, and now leverages her demonstrated experience leading complex customer-focused businesses to drive MillerKnoll industry innovation and leadership forward. Andi sits on the board of Taylor Morrison, the National Association of Manufacturers, and The Right Place. She holds a Bachelor of Arts degree from the College of William & Mary and an AMP from Harvard Business School. First of all, Andi, nice to see you. Thanks for joining me.
You too, Willie. Thanks for having me.
That's great. When we were going to do this last week, I was actually in my home office and I had one of your Eames chairs sitting right behind me. And I feel bad that I don't have such a great prop right behind me. But I would have
loved that.
It would have been great. I actually have 3 of them in my house. So I'm a little bit of an Eames chair addict. Few people have 3. And I've got 3 different colors, actually. But there's a lot I want to talk about as both your background and then how you've gotten to where you are today and then where you're going with MillerKnoll. But one of the things that you have in your Instagram bio is mother, wife, design addict, champion of the planet, defender of equity and inclusion, and CEO of MillerKnoll. So I want to go after design addict as the third qualifier of Andi. So where did the design addict come from? And I want to dive a little bit into your childhood and your dad and all that stuff. But where's that design addict? Few people call themselves a design addict. Where's that come from?
Well, I come from a long line of, let's call them artists in a variety of different specialties, mostly music, but also the visual arts. I went to a fine arts high school, and I remember in high school studying Herman Miller and design, and just the whole nature of design as a tool to solve problems and to do good in the world. And then well-intentioned design. It's not just about aesthetic. It's not just about form. It's about function and it's about impact. And so for me, that idea of how do you create things in the world that are both solving problems that are beautiful and that do good in the world. And so my whole life, I was in fashion for many, many years, but thinking about those details and thinking about the problems you're solving, whether in my past life, it was about how do you get a great wrinkle-free pant for the guy that doesn't want to iron, to today, how do you create an amazing chair that will stand the test of time, that will be beautiful, that you can break down and recycle, that will be great quality, and that will solve a problem in today's world. So design for me has always been a really great combo platter of beauty, kind of in function, and then doing good in the world.
You talked about music. Your dad was a musician. He taught music. Talk about that side of your creative and what came from your dad. You lost your dad early. So I want to segue from this into being raised by a single mom and what you learned, because I think a lot of your leadership comes from your mom. But for a moment, talk about your dad, his influence on you in the relatively short period of time that your dad was in your life.
Yeah, my dad was an amazing, positive, creative spirit. He's one of those people that kind of woke up in the morning singing. And so I grew up with this influence of optimism and happiness, and also just this kind of maniacal devotion to what he thought was his calling, which was music. So it really opened up my eyes to different kinds of roles that parents could play. And it was very, I guess at the time, I was born in the 60s, kind of an untraditional household, right? Where you had a father who was a musician, and most of my dad's parents or my friends' parents were businessmen, I guess. And he was just really an incredible example of, I think, integrity and creativity. And then my brother kind of took that up. My brother's also a musician. My mother was a singer. And so, I was a dancer. I was a ballet dancer, which is why I went to high school for the arts, but I was never really the artist in the family. I worked really hard. I was devoted, but I didn't have the same talent that the rest of my family did. But I think what it did for me to be surrounded by people that had this gift and this passion for art was give me an appreciation of what it means in the world and what it adds to the world. And I think it changed my outlook on how things balance between art, creativity, and the business side and the practical sides of life. So I've always sort of wanted to have both of those in my life.
But your first dream was to be an archaeologist.
I know, isn't that weird? I wanted to dig up things.
The first thing I can't, how was it that you even remember that your first dream was to be about an archaeologist before wanting to be a ballerina?
Because I was so serious about it. Well, I thought it was so cool. I was totally into it.
I would imagine
my backyard.
When you were 8 years old and you said, I want to be an archaeologist, everyone's like, wow, she's different. She's special if she knows she wants to be an archaeologist. But That's a pretty random thing to know you want to be when you're 8 years old.
It totally is. And I don't know why. I can't tell you where the inspiration came from, but my mother would tell you I would drive her crazy. People have dogs that dig up their backyard, and she had a daughter that dug up the backyard. But I was always finding stuff. And I think I was interested in the history. But then I kind of, as you grow and you learn, you find other things. But yeah, it was my first dream. Isn't that funny?
So you then go to wanting to be a ballerina and dancing, and then you go and become an art history major at William & Mary. I guess as I think back on those currents, one, clearly archaeology and history says you have a real respect for the past. And yet ballet and art says you're also creatively minded. And that to some degree seems to be the perfect combination of your interests and why you're in the current job you're in.
Yeah, it kind of is, isn't it? I think for me, and even as a leader, when you say those things, for me, it's always such a balance of how do you learn and respect the past? And how do you do what you're doing today really, really well? And then how are you always kind of looking around at what the future might bring and what the future might hold? And I think the arts always encompass that respect for what came before you, because in some sense, every artistic movement is sort of in reaction to what was in the past, right? And then what the influences are today. And the same thing in business. So I guess for me, all those experiences led me to wanting a career that wasn't just about the numbers, but was about other things too, that allowed for a certain amount of creativity and allowed for just a certain amount of, I think, encompassing what I think I've always appreciated and admired in the world. And I have found in both my last life, my past career, and also in this one, a really good blending of the two, which has been a really great experience.
Start a legacy. Start turning dreams into realities. A better world begins with you. Better communities start with us.
Before we move out and into your professional experience, starting at Bloomingdale's and going on to Gap, is there anything as it relates to what you studied or things that you were passionate about that you look back upon and sort of say, I wish I'd sort of pursued that? I was with somebody a week ago, and we were just talking about sort of certain, not regrets, but I said to him, I don't have many regrets in life, but when I ran my fastest marathon when I was 28 years old, which is a really fast time, I said to this guy who was an athlete, I said, there are not many regrets in my life, but I wish rather than just jumping to business, I'd actually stopped, gotten a coach, and really sort of just figured out whether being an endurance athlete for a period of time was something that I should have done. And I just didn't. I just, I ran this really fast Boston Marathon, said, that's great, and moved on, rather than just kind of saying, oh, I should have gone and pursued that for a period of time just to see if I could have become a really, really elite athlete and had a fun experience with it. Is there anything, as you look back, given something of a, I was going to use the word peripatetic, but that's probably not the right word, but just kind of like a past that had a lot of different streams to it. Is there anything now, as you look back and said, I wish I'd either pursued the ballet route a little bit more. I wish I hadn't lost that love of archaeology, or anything else that you saw?
By the way, Willie, it's never too late to become an endurance athlete. Nothing's stopping you.
Believe me, I am sorry. I
can do it.
I've hung up those stirrups. I still do stuff like that, Andy, a lot. I mean, but I'm very much I'm an age group athlete now. Back then, I was a world class athlete. So there's a big difference between being an age group athlete and a class athlete.
Yeah, me too. It is a great question. I think if I look back on my life, you always ask yourself, what if? But I feel in many ways like every experience sort of led me to the next. So I don't look back and have regrets about, oh gosh, I wish I had pursued that, or I wish I had pursued that. My regrets really are more about, I wish I had been more fearless. I wish I had cared less about what people thought when I was in my 20s, or those kinds of things. The wisdom you have as you get older and you think about some of the risks that you've taken. Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say I wish I had picked a different career path, or I wish I had become a doctor. But I really wish that I had been less afraid to kind of really lean into what I thought, or to share points of view. And I think that those are the regrets I have as I get older. You sort of say that confidence that you develop with wisdom and time, and maybe a little bit of not caring as you get older. I wish I could infuse my younger self with that. And if I did, then I might say, hey, I might have picked a different path. But I don't look back with regrets on the path not taken so much as that.
It's interesting you say that, only in that, as I think back on your career, you certainly haven't been hesitant to take new jobs, to take new opportunities.
No.
Lead. So there hasn't been anything there where you've taken a conservative path.
No.
And yet when you say that, it makes me think back to, is there anything about the loss of your dad early that made it so that you took that loss was something that you didn't want to experience again? And that traumatic experience of losing your dad early and living just with a single mom and your brother was something that said to you, if I have the opportunity to take real risk, I don't want to go down that really risky side because I know what real loss is like. Is that, am I stretching too far here?
Therapy, Willie. Yes. No, I don't think you are. I do think the loss of a parent when you're young like that, it does make you care so much more about what might happen to your other parent, or the risk of losing your family. So I sort of became, in my family, and in some cases in the rest of my life, sort of the caretaker and the keeper of keeping everybody together, mediating to keep the peace. And I use that skill a lot when you're trying to bring together disparate points of view in all parts of your life, when you're trying to find common ground, when you're trying to help people resolve conflicts, listening to what's going on. So I think it has served me well, but it does make me think a little bit about, if you look at what I've done, it certainly doesn't look like I was risk averse. On the other hand, I think about, having an opportunity to go live and work abroad, for several years. I didn't do that. And I regret not doing that. But those kinds of things, you're just, I'll stay closer to the family. And was that driven by my background? Maybe, maybe that was more important to me than doing something like that. But it's a great question. A great question.
You went to Bloomingdale's first, started in retail. Big brown bag.
I worked in a little art gallery first before I went to Bloomingdale's.
Okay. But Big Brown Bag, when it was Big Brown Bag launched when you were there, many people are sitting here going, what's the Big Brown Bag? Whoever remembers the Big Brown Bag? Today, the Big Brown Bag is ubiquitous. Everyone's got a Big Brown Bag.
It's iconic.
But back in the day, I remember distinctly my grandmother came back from going to Bloomingdale's in I don't know what year. And she had this big brown bag. She's like, isn't this the greatest thing in the world? I've got like a satchel that can put all the big things in it. That was new and innovative back then from a retail standpoint.
And it was, And there was the little brown bag. I'm old, but I'm not that old. It was there when I got there, but it was.
I'm dating myself while I'm dating you. So,
but you make a good point about Bloomingdale's, because when I got there, it was still sort of the shopping as theater and kind of bigger than life. And part of that was the shopping bag and the seasonal shopping bags and how you thought about how things were presented in the store. And it was a very different time when there was no internet, there was no shopping online. It was all about the experience when you walked in and the visuals and the windows. Remember when windows like mattered when you walked down the streets, and then how windows were a big deal. And so it was fun, because in some ways for me, it kind of brought that whole theater and stage and creative element to a business, which was really super fun for me to learn. And I was very young, and back in the day, that was when they had sort of the fast track management program, and you sort of rotated around different parts of the business. So you learned fast, and it was really a great business back then, and fun, very different. Of course, it went bankrupt while I was there, so I learned a lot from that, emerged from that. Yeah.
I remember back in the Windows day, my grandmother used to go to New York. We lived in Washington. She used to go up and she'd come back and she said, "Oh, you should see the window at Barney's." And Barney's is another one that's now gone. But
I loved Barney's.
Literally, like seeing the Barney's window was like, I don't know, worth coming home and talking about. I mean, anyway.
Well, Macy's, think about Macy's, and they were an event, and I think to some degree you can still get a little bit of that, but it's just very different now.
You mentioned that there was no online back then. When you were at Gap, that's when you were tasked actually to be on the first group that was focused on online sales. And talk for a moment about, like, as I think about the AI world that we all face. I was at a lunch today, and somebody sitting there and said, I told them this. I said that I was at a board meeting back at HBS 3 weeks ago, and they ran us through all the things they're doing on teaching AI. And the professor who was showing us what they're teaching in AI then turned to Mary Erdos, who runs asset management at JP Morgan, because she sits on a small committee at HBS that's giving industry input back to HBS as it relates to how industry is using AI to inform their curriculum. And Mary was talking about all the things they're doing on this small committee. And then she said, "Look, let me tell you, 3 years ago, if you were an analyst joining JP Morgan, we taught you Excel. 2 years ago, we shift from teaching you Excel to teaching you Python. And this coming summer, you won't learn Excel, you won't learn Python, you will learn basically AI query prompting." Okay. So pretty wild, right? I said that to my friend yesterday at lunch, and he's like, "And therefore we're not going to need any analysts in 2 years because the technology is going to do it all." And I said to him, "Well, hang on a second, Rick." I said, "Slow down before you jump to that, because that makes sense." Think about when Excel was introduced in whatever, 1980, 1981, plenty of people on Wall Street who had their Hewlett-Packard calculator or their slide rule all of a sudden saw this whiz-bang technology, and they said, "Well, all my math skills, all my capabilities here are now gone because some idiot can come in and just put it into Excel and it's going to do it for it. Therefore, the number of analysts on Wall Street is going to go down dramatically." And as we both know, from 1980 to 2024, all that's happened is we've needed more and more people in the financial services industry using Excel, using Python, now giving prompts and doing things to supply us with services. You were at Gap when they said, "Figure out this thing called the internet and how you sell online." How does that experience play into how you're thinking about technology today? And then also, when was it when you were at Gap that all of a sudden people were like, "We actually sold something over online"?
Yeah. So if I go into the Wayback Machine, our online business had started. So I didn't start it up, but I was part of the team that actually kind of launched it into a multi-brand experience. And when I went from kind of merchandising and store line retail to go into online, I'll remember to this day, my boss telling me, "Nobody's ever going to buy clothes online. This is like the dumbest career move you can ever make. Don't do it." And I kept thinking, I don't know. I don't believe it. I think it's going to change the way we shop. And of course, it's changed the way we do everything. And I think for me, making that transition and realizing the amount of information that you could glean about a customer journey, about what was important and how quickly you got it. It wasn't just word of mouth and talking to 100 people a day. It was instantaneous. And that fuels a very different way of working, a very different way of problem solving, a different kind of agility, and a completely different business model. And I think in so many ways, when you look at what's happening to all of us today, and listen, I know enough about AI to be dangerous, but certainly not enough to be an expert. But for everything I read, I am alternately terrified and excited. And I think I felt the same way about every digital innovation that we've lived through, because for everyone, and even industrial revolution, everyone has said, oh my gosh, our jobs are going to go away. The world's going to change. We're all going to hell in a handbasket. And I think that's always a possibility with change and how we move forward. But I think it's about how we embrace it and think about it and use it positively. And I do think for those people that are, oh, we have to stop the machines, we have to unplug them. I mean, AI is already in our lives in so many ways. I mean, for everybody that's got a phone, like we are already experiencing how this technology can influence our lives and how it can influence our lives productively. So for me, I think one of the competitive advantages, certainly of our company and any company today that's going to be successful, is embracing change and thinking about how you can operate with agility and thinking about how you can adapt quickly to some of these changes. And I feel certain, whether it's analysts at JP Morgan or you name the field, some of the things that architects and designers do today that require a significant amount of time, those tasks will probably easily be taken over by AI very quickly in the future. But then our job is to sort of figure out, how do you use the power of the human mind to do the things that the machines can't do? And how do you free that up to kind of change how we're working? So I think really trying to adapt quickly and put ourselves in that position of embracing in a positive way what the changes are, instead of trying to maybe stand in the way and think they're never going to affect our lives, because they are. And listen, one of my professors used to say that change is happening at a faster rate than it's ever happened and at a slower rate than it ever will in the future. And I think that's just the way it's going to be, right?
I think that's right. Retail is an interesting industry for you to cut your teeth on, in the sense that likes and dislikes change daily. There's a new season, there's a new style, there's a new this, there's a new that. You were at Gap when Mickey Drexler was making it for himself and the brand. What was so unique about Mickey? What'd you see in Mickey as the leader of Gap that was so sort of noteworthy, that made Mickey, to a great degree, a retail legend?
Mickey was and is brilliant, confident, has a strong point of view. He was a great listener. And I think he was always open to different points of view and always talking to people. He was a great observer of people and of human nature. And you couple that all together, along with just this incredible drive and work rate and passion, it added up to a really unique point of view on the business. And I think he came along at a time in the retail industry where people were looking for sort of that trusted editor, like, what should we be doing? What's cool now? And he filled that void of kind of reimagining what our business could be in a very authoritative and confident way. And he had a great, and still does, had a great eye for talent, had a great eye for understanding, kind of like Steve Jobs, like what people might want that they didn't know they wanted yet. And that ability to sort of look around the corner. And in an industry like fashion, to your point, that is moving so quickly, it was a really unique time. So I can't think of a time when I interacted with Mickey where I didn't learn something, but he was also fearsome. Like, he, not scary, but like, he was a fierce talent. You were kind of in awe of what he would do. I remember standing in a store visit with him and we were having some conversation. I remember him asking me, would you bet your job on that? And I was like, yeah, I actually would. But he listened really well. So I think he probably is responsible for really developing a lot of really talented minds out there that worked with him closely. I was really junior in the organization when Mickey was still there, so I sort of experienced him from afar. But I think the people that worked with him directly really had a great benefit.
You mentioned Steve Jobs. Mickey was on the Apple board, wasn't he?
I think he was.
Yeah, he was. Yeah. Talk for a moment about that assertive leadership, but at the same time, listening. Because as I listened to you talk about Mickey, there's both. He was very forceful in what he said. Most people who are forceful in what they say, many people would say, don't listen. They're they're so stuck in their ways that they come out with these statements that they're like, there's no way you can move them. And yet at the same time, you said numerous times that Mickey listened really well. That's either a unique combination or it's actually, is that hard to do? Is it hard to be that definitive about things and at the same time be a good listener?
I think it's next to impossible for most people. And I think the key, and nobody's perfect, is to know when to listen and who to listen to, right? And I think Mickey's unique talent was really listening to customers, listening to insights that he gleaned sort of from his travels and walking around and talking to different people in the business. But I do think you always, when you have a strong vision for your business, Mickey always had a strong vision. There's always going to be people that don't agree or people that may not feel listened to because of that really strong point of view. And that's not just a Mickey thing. I think what you point out is a dichotomy that many leaders face, which is sort of, how do I fearlessly move towards the future, but also make sure I'm not missing anything? Like that whole, how do you exhibit curiosity and make sure you're always asking, who else could be at the table? Who else might have a point of view? Who else might add to this discussion while still steering the ship in the right way? And I think ultimately what happens to many leaders is if you err too much on one side or the other, you go off course, right? And you don't always have the answers. So if you're too strong on it's my way of the future without listening to the voices, so it's a balance, right? And we can't always do that perfectly. So sometimes we fail in hitting that balance, I think.
So you were at Banana Republic and said, was it that you felt you needed to get more education, that you wanted to use going back to HBS as a career change agent? Was it you just sort of wanted a break? What was it that said, I'm going to stop my corporate career, which up until that point had been very successful, and say, I'm going to leap up and go back to school and sort of do an exec ed program that allows me to sort of press the reset button if I want to?
I'd always wanted to go back to school. I'd always wanted to get my MBA, but once you get further along in your career, going for a full 2-year is kind of crazy.
Right.
And the last time I was ready to go, I was ready to go. And then I got pregnant with my son, which was like hysterical. So that kind of, how that changes your life. I don't know if you have kids, but anyway, it was life changing for me. And I think, you get to a certain point, or at least I got to this point with fashion. There was a grind to it when fast fashion came along, when everything was instantaneous, when all of a sudden you were producing one thing after another thing after another thing that made the industry and made what we were doing start to feel disposable in some way. Like it felt like we were running on a treadmill to produce more landfill instead of thinking about what should we be doing that's important, and that trend nature. And I wanted kind of off the merry-go-round, I think.
Do you think that's changed? Sorry to jump in, Andy. Do you think that's changed at all? In other words, now looking back at that decision there, has the fashion industry continued on that trajectory by your assessment?
I think so. I think that everything in our world is so quick and is changing so quickly, and trends are still so important. I don't know that it's changed that much, but I do think there are people in that industry that are making a difference, that are thinking more long term, that are thinking more sustainably. I think Patagonia is a perfect example. I think there are companies out there that are REI that are making a stand against, hey, listen, you don't always need something new. Like, how about repairing what you have? How about thinking about the longevity of the quality products? How about thinking about the impact on the world? So I don't think I can condemn the whole industry and say that no one is making progress, because we certainly are. I think there's a long way to go. And I would probably say that's true for most industries where you're trying to satisfy consumers' need. And now I forgot what the other question was. Really.
No, I cut across you on that, just about the trajectory of fashion. But you said basically it felt like it was heading in a direction where it's just everything's new, everything's got to be done. There's no kind of sustainability to it. And so you said, I want to get off this treadmill. So you said, let's go to HBS.
And I think the other thing to add to that is I feel like, Gap was a company that had so much success for so long. And I think one of the difficulties when you're so successful is that you do stop being brave enough to really make dramatic change. And I didn't think that we were brave enough to make dramatic change to really think about what the company could be. And so this is one of those times in my life where I sort of looked to my husband. I was like, we have a little kid, and but I need to just do something different. I need to make a different choice. And so I left, and I look back on it, and it was terrifying. But I'm so glad I did it. It was the biggest gift in my life. And I said, I'm going to go. I'm going to go back to school, and I'm going to leave home and take care of our son. And I'll be back in, 4 or 5 months. And it was life changing. And I also spent a lot of that 18 months, because I gave myself 18 months talking to a lot of people and trying to think about what I really wanted to do next. And listen, I was fortunate that I was able to do that. I was very lucky. But it gave me a lot of insight. And then when I did go to HBS, there's nothing like being surrounded by 150 people from all over the world, from all different businesses that have different points of view. I learned a ton from my professors. I learned more from my cohort. And to this day, we still have a WhatsApp string where we're always trading ideas and thoughts. And I think that was the biggest gift for me, and really opened my eyes to what I was passionate about. And I knew that I wanted a different direction in my life.
So Herman Miller calls.
Yeah, it's kind of funny.
Yeah. Talk to me about that. Just as it relates to, I remember when I was at business school and got phone calls from companies that I was like, what? You want me to, like HEB, the grocer down in Texas? I'd never even heard of HEB. And they call me up and say, hey, would you like to fly down to San Antonio and meet with us? And I was like, do I really want to go into the grocery business? But anyway, what was it that sort of captured you as it relates to Herman Miller?
I had a couple of great colleagues in my classroom at HEB. I'd never heard of them either, but it sounds like an amazing company.
It's Herman Miller called. When I say that, Charles Butt, who was an entrepreneur who started HEB, was just like an incredible entrepreneur. And HEB, as much as you think in the grocery world of a Kroger or a Whole Foods or a Walmart, HEB was very cutting edge as it relates to the way that they bought the food, displayed the food, some of the in-store experiences you could have, all the things that today are sort of taken for granted as far as a Whole Foods experience. A lot of that came out of HEB. So my comments on HEB are not in any way to say the company wasn't incredible. And I went down and had a wonderful meeting with them. I was just sort of sitting there saying, I'm going to be in banking or consulting. And all of a sudden out of left field comes this offer to go into the grocery business. And I was like, where'd that come from? Anyway, go ahead.
It's kind of out of your purview, I guess. Again, what your question was, I went to Herman Miller, or Herman Miller called. Is that what you asked me? Yeah. So I think it was my last day. It might've been graduation. I was sitting in my dorm, and the recruiter called, and she said something like, have you ever heard of Herman Miller? And I instantly went back in my mind to studying them in high school, because the performing arts school I went to was actually in Michigan. So in high school, I had come here and lived for 3 years in this fine arts boarding school. So I was super familiar with the company, with the impact, with kind of their kind of American kind of founding. And I was like, of course I've heard of Herman Miller. I think it's an amazing company. And I'm embarrassed to say I didn't even know the kind of tip of the iceberg. And so, I started the conversations with them. And throughout the process, I kept saying, I'm not sure you want to talk to me. I really don't know much about manufacturing furniture. That's not my jam. I can make a great t-shirt, but I don't really. And they kept saying, we actually are looking to change the company, to diversify the company. We're looking to build different parts of the company, and we want someone that has a different kind of experience. Because for me, I think what was important to me at that time was to find a company that aligned with my values, that I felt like I could do something that was meaningful, but also to find a company where I could bring skills that would be useful to them, and that had something needed to accomplish where I would learn something and I would have skills that were useful to them. And it seemed like along the process, it was a good match at the right time.
You mentioned Zeeland, Michigan. To those people listening in, Zeeland is directly across from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. To anybody who
there's a ferry that goes between the two in the summer, as a matter of fact. So
if you go straight due east from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, to those who know where Milwaukee is, you land basically right in Zeeland. And an interesting place to have a corporate headquarters.
Well, it's actually, I'm based in Holland, which is actually right kind of on the lake shore of Lake Michigan. And then one of our main manufacturing plants is Zeeland, which is our mailing address. We also have plants in Muskegon. We have several plants in Holland. So we have kind of manufacturing bases all over. We have a major headquarters in Chicago, one in New York, one in London, one in Hong Kong. So we're very global. But if you look back at how we started in Zeeland over 100 years ago. And we designed our plant so that we can, add on to it over the years. And we had our office there and our plants. And we've sort of grown over the years. So now we've kind of morphed into the rest of this area. And I'm told, just like North Carolina, the reason the furniture industry grew up in this area was basically because lumber was plentiful back then. So you see in Michigan and North Carolina, a lot of furniture manufacturers and designers.
So the recruiter calls you and says, company that focuses on problem solving through wandering, through asking questions. When I read that, to be honest with you, I'm like, furniture? I mean, I'm just being honest, Andy. I'm sitting there sort of like, we're in banking, right? Every deal is bespoke. We're supposed to they say finance that office building over there. It's distinct. It's got a distinct rent roll. It's got a distinct location. We got to really think and figure out how to do it. When I think about like a beautiful piece of furniture, the chair sitting right behind me, the one of your chairs that I'm sitting in right now. I mean, when the Aeron chair came out, wow, that's what I'm sitting in. And that was amazing. And it's obviously been not only replicated a gajillion times, which I'm sure is a huge headache for you all, but that's super innovative in the sense that was what the business world needed for the changing ergonomics of people who used it. And then I think about something like the Eames chair, which I told you at the top, I've got a number of them. And I think about that as being a piece of art. It's beautiful. It's incredible. But when I hear problem solving, I don't necessarily go back to the furniture industry. What is it that's so unique about what goes on that says we innovate, we change?
I think at Herman Miller, when it was a standalone company, and at Knoll, when it was a standalone company, there are different influences that shaped the way they approached design. So if you look at Florence Knoll and what she did to the furniture industry, she really invented interior design kind of as a profession. Her passion was about, hey, listen, it's not just about, does stuff look good in the environment? There's things that are happening in this environment that you have to understand. But overall, what is the building like? What is the building for? How does the environment work to shape what's happening in the inside of the environment? How does that relate to the actual structure and the pieces of furniture that support what people are doing? How does it support well-being? How does it support connection? How does it support the human? And so the problems that you're solving can vary depending on the environment that you're in. And then Herman Miller, which really started as a residential furniture company. And then, when we invented the cubicle way back when, part of the problem that Probst was trying to solve was, what are people doing in the modern office? We've gone from rows and rows and rows of secretaries and businessmen on the outside office, and we've gone to a different kind of collaborative working environment. And how do we support that? So when you start with the problem that you're solving, and you design and innovate around that problem, you end up in a very different place. And part of the problem that the Aeron chair was solving was just people were sitting for longer and longer and longer periods. And how do you support people so that they're comfortable? How to have the right ergonomic support? And so those kinds of questions of comfort, I think about gaming. We've entered into the gaming business in the last 6 years, and everyone might think, oh, well, that's just what 14-year-old kids do and who cares? Well, everyone games one way or the other. It's a huge growing industry. It's also a sport. And the posture that you have when you're gaming versus sitting at your computer versus you're doing a variety of other tasks is very different. You sit in a gaming chair for a long time, so you might need to have cooling elements. So really asking the question of what problem are you trying to solve? Are you trying to solve performance? Are you trying to solve comfort? Are you trying to solve energy? Are you trying to solve a spatial problem? Because design and furniture and space are more than just how it looks. Yes, you want things to be beautiful. The Eames Lounge and Ottoman is beautiful for sure, but you can also take a nap in it, right? It'll also last for decades. It's a quality that over time will have a patina that grows with you and supports you in different ways. So it's not just, is it pretty? That's important. But what else does it do, and what purpose is it serving in the world and in the space that it's in?
As I was researching for this, there was article after article about Eames chairs that have been passed down by generation. And that there was an article that was just in Business Insider about the fact that the thing that sort of yuppie New Yorkers want right now is a $7,500 Eames chair to, go with their, aspirations to have a Porsche 911 or whatever the case might be.
I missed that one.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'll send it to you. It's pretty good. And when I think about that, I say, okay, you're a luxury brand. You're a luxury brand. But then I think about all the rest of the market that you serve. How do you, given the number of products that you make, and talking about bringing the two firms together, one more on the commercial side, one more on the home side, that now you're in all of the built environment. How do you think about, if you will, premium pricing and iconic furniture versus more utilitarian and price points as you go to market with that in the built environment?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, I think of MillerKnoll as sort of the overarching keeper of the collective, right? If you look at the brands within the collective, and we have a variety of brands, we sort of span the gamut. So if you were to take Geiger Datesweiser, which is kind of the most premium of our brands, very bespoke, very made to measure, interiors and offices, but also, amazing conference tables that are designed for boardrooms that are completely unique and made out of very different materials. So very, very, very high in craftsmanship. Everything we do is very high in quality, but pinnacle, right? And then if you go throughout the collective and you have Herman Miller and Knoll and Hay and Not One and Spinny Bexelfelt and a variety of different brands, they run the gamut. And if you go to Hay, for example, which is one of our Danish brands, Hay would tell you that they are a very democratic price point. And part of what they do is they try to design the best product that they can at a very democratic price point that will serve many, many, many people. Not One would probably tell you the same thing in a sustainable way. So as we combine the collective, I think one of the reasons why we thought about this merger was we really do have a brand or a product kind of along the spectrum that will suffice and fit many, many different kinds of needs. So I don't know that I would qualify us necessarily as luxury. I think we have luxury brands or brands that serve a luxury market, and certainly premium brands. And part of the reason our brands are premium is the quality, right? If you think about the materials that we use, the amount of energy and innovation and money we spend on using sustainable materials, and then the testing that we put everything through. I mean, I was sitting with our head of innovation 2 days ago, and we were testing a new, just incredible version of Aeron that we're launching soon, but it's super sustainable for a variety of reasons. But we put it through almost 2 years of testing to make sure that it will be just as good as anything else we would have made in a less sustainable material. And that takes time and energy. So, I think we have a variety of different options, but one thing we are not, more than likely, we're not discount. So we're not going to play in the realm of kind of cheaply discounted goods because we're just not good at that. We take a lot of pride in the quality and the craftsmanship of what we do. And I don't think there's anything wrong with a lower price point, affordable option. We're probably more in the mid to premium luxury price range.
When I think about Ferrari and people, the amount of, the line of people who want to buy a Ferrari, you see these high-end brands that are extending out into other things. Do those types of brand extensions, if you will, pose a competitive threat to such an established and sort of premium brand as MillerKnoll?
I don't think so. I think brand extensions pose an opportunity for all of us. But no, not necessarily. I think for us, the biggest threat, I want to say for us, but for everybody, is not adapting to the changing world we're living in today, right? Continuing to do things the way we've always done them. I think COVID and living through the pandemic, living through a major acquisition and integration, it was a process of sort of looking at everything you do and everything you hold sacred and saying, what are we keeping and what are we throwing out as we build a new company and build a new culture and build a new reality in this world that we're in now, where flexibility is king, where people may or may not come back to their offices, although I have a lot to say about that. All of that requires you to really be thinking about what's next and how you can change your business model, how you can disrupt yourself to think about the future. So I don't worry so much about brand extensions and other premium brands as I worry about how are we thinking about how we're going to grow? How are we thinking about what needs we need to solve in the future? There's so much opportunity. If you think about all the things we do, whether it's the contract side of our business, which is that kind of commercial interiors piece that you're familiar with, but also the residential side of our business, there's so much white space and there's so many different creative things we can do. But you have to be adaptable and you have to be agile. And I think that's really the greatest threat out there to any of us.
So you said you got a lot to talk about on office, back to office. Talk to me about back to office.
Well, you know,
because by the way, I'm in a brand new office. This is these offices.
It's beautiful, by the way. Beautiful.
They're gorgeous. But I was in here on Friday, and we've got at Walker Dunlop a policy of 3 days in the office, and I don't feel like I need to change the policy. I think we just need to push harder to get people back in and make it so that they want to be here and that they want to engage with their coworkers. Sure. So I was in here on Friday and there weren't a whole lot of people in here. And I'm like, folks, we built this place to make it nicer than your home. Like, we've invested to make it so you come in here and you feel like you're in the lap of luxury in the nicest hotel you've ever been in. And that's for a purpose. It's to use it every day, not just Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Right. What's your take on back to office and whether getting people back into the office on a consistent basis is the future, or whether we stay kind of where we've been?
I don't think we're going to stay where we've been. And when I say where we've been, I would say, I think there are companies on a different kind of continuum. You have some companies that are still frozen in, gosh, can I ask people to come back more than a day or two? And then you have companies on the other end that, you know, early and quickly they were like, everybody butts in seats 5 days a week. We're going right back to where we were. I don't think this kind of melange of different approaches will hang around for a while, because I think as we research,
you don't think it'll hang? You don't.
I don't. We have a huge group of folks that do research and insights on kind of what is happening in the workspace. And we really delve into these issues. And when the pandemic first happened, I think we all felt we were very self-congratulatory. Look, we all had to go remote and we're all doing so well and we're more productive and gosh, this is a new way of living. And it felt great. And then as time went on, we started to discover that there were certain things missing in how we were collaborating, certain things missing in our culture. And you know, any group that I'm in, I always ask, hey, how was the remote school experience for your children? Who wants to keep doing that? And nobody raises their hand, because I think education and what happened with their kids remote is a really stark example of what people miss when they're not together. So I think as CEOs and leaders of companies start to see what's missing, we've found out now that we're actually less productive when we're not together as much. We actually don't have much culture. We have less shared identity. We have less ability to resolve conflicts, because when you don't have that weak tie at work, when you're not running into somebody in the hallway to be like, hey, how's your weekend? Or did you get to see your husband? Or whatever that might be. You don't build the relationships you need when times are tough and you have to work through difficult stuff. And so what we're finding now as we continue to research the continuum is that more and more people are dissatisfied. And we're finding more and more people that joined companies as remote workers or moved away in COVID and became remote are leaving companies, and they're leaving companies at alarming rates, and they're not feeling attached. So as you look at engagement, and engagement soared during COVID and then plummeted in corporations after COVID, I think we're going to see people start to make different choices. What I will say, however, is that I think flexibility is here to stay. So do I think the days of 9 to 5 or 7 to 10, 5 days a week in the office are going to come back? I actually don't. I think building an environment that supports a flexible work environment, that supports teamwork, that supports collaboration, well-being, and supports change, like the ability to change, I think is really important. So whether that's, hey, I want you to be here the majority of the time, whether that's 3 days a week, if that works for you, I think people will find their balance, but I don't think it's going to be an environment where people are majority of time not together. And I know maybe it sounds disingenuous because this is what we do for a living, but I am very passionate about even what I see in my own workspace and what I've seen with how people have gone through this and what I feel is really important in how we communicate. And that element of being together, the element of seeing each other and building relationships, it's faster. It's easier. I don't care what you say. There's no substitute for face-to-face. Now, again, flexibility, super important.
So
I'm on a soapbox, Willy.
No, I love it. But when you were sitting there talking about face-to-face and engagement with one another and dealing with difficult times, which is exactly what being in the office is all about, and engaging with your colleagues.
So we're constantly reinforced this separateness, but it's a lot easier, to your point, when you see someone you disagree with over and over again and you start to see them as a human. It's a lot easier to try to find common ground. And listen, the problems we have to solve in business are not easy. Like they've never been easy, but the world is so complex and it's changing so rapidly that being able to get together and have constructive dialogue and creative dialogue and innovate is so much easier when you can do that together, face to face for the majority of the time. And I always say, I think the most important parts of being a leader are empathy and curiosity. Empathy, because you really have to try to listen and understand, but curiosity, partly because you really, not just because you want to find out stuff to help the business, but you really have to be able to see other people as human beings, as they are. You have to be interested in finding out about each other, because once you have that human to human connection, the polarization, you may not always agree. Hopefully you won't, but you're going to have respect for each other. Right. And you're going to be able to find compromise. And sometimes I feel like, oh, nostalgic old lady wishing for how it was. But I do think that's really impacting our world in a variety of ways: business, politics, schools. But I also believe that we have the capacity to change it. I really do.
Oh, well, if the moment we kind of lose faith in that one, we're really in trouble. Talk to me for a second, though, about what you're seeing on the office side of things or on the home front side of things as it relates to spend. So to some degree, you're kind of a leading indicator. So forget about the fact that we can sit there. We'll take an article today about the fact that the tower in New York, 40 Wall Street, that Donald Trump happens to own. There was a big article about whether his occupancy has fallen to 80%. And there's they got a refinancing coming up next year. And so the question was, is even 40 Wall imperiled as an asset? Let's park that for a second, because that's the building. What I want to know is, are the tenants of that building saying, we're going to renew our lease, and in the process of renewing our lease, we're going to upgrade and we're going to buy new furniture from MillerKnoll? Or are they sitting there saying, nobody's back at the office, I'm just going to keep on extending, the use of this old office furniture and keep going that way? Where do you think, as you look at the kind of the order book and what you're talking to about big users, is it more heading back in and investing, or is it more using the same for longer?
Yeah, I think a couple of years ago, Willy, it was using the same for longer. I think the uncertainty in the world a couple of years ago, if I sat down with a table of other CEOs, the biggest comment was, we weren't going to ever have to come back, and how are we going to unload all this real estate? I think now what I'm hearing frequently from other tables of CEOs, but also customers, is, when are we coming back together? How are we going to use our space more effectively? How do we have to change our space? Because the reality that we're going to have some people that are virtual and some people that are in the office, and what are we going to use the office for? It's not just heads down at my computer work. It's a lot more collaboration. There's a lot of different kinds of things I might use the space for. And the space I had prior to the pandemic may not be fit for purpose. So I think more conversations on what we're seeing in our pipeline and what we're seeing in the A&D community are around, I think, probably smaller spaces. Probably, but I can't say that for sure with total confidence, but definitely changing spaces. I think it's really a question of when. I do think there's a significant amount of folks out there that are sort of kind of waiting to see what's happening in the many elections that are happening in the world, waiting to see what's going to happen with interest rates. And I think some of that will dissipate throughout the year. But I haven't talked to a business leader that's in the camp of, gosh, I'm not going to do anything. More people are on the precipice of, I have to make a really hard decision about how much I'm going to require people to come back. But in order to do that, it's kind of back to what you said earlier. I need to have a space that's compelling. I need to have a space that fits what they want to do today. And I need to have policies that support that around how I can be flexible and virtual and all of those things. So we're really seeing more on the lines of change, make better, and invest than we are, hey, just hang out where we are. I haven't heard that in a very long time.
Given that you supply furniture to both the corporate market as well as the home market, you've got an incredibly sort of, if you will, diverse client base. How do you bring diverse talent into MillerKnoll to be able to help you understand what's happening from both a design standpoint, trend standpoint of, I want this at home, I want that at my office, what have you? You're a global company, so there's also the Dutch market is distinct from the US market, which is distinct from the Japanese market. How do you deal with that complexity, if you will?
I think you're right. Every market is completely different. But if I take a step back from that, we've really, in the last almost 6 years now, really made a concerted effort in how we're thinking about bringing talent on board, because you can't bring in people that think just like you, that you're comfortable with, that you know. And so thinking about the slates of people that we're talking to, thinking about where we're recruiting from, what schools we're recruiting from, where our interns are coming from, sort of at the beginning of the pipeline. But as we look at the needs of the business and where we want to go, whether it's the influence of AI, whether it's the influence of all technology on the business, whether it's the speed that we need to innovate and design for the residential side of the market, people that have different capabilities. So for example, if you look at the residential side of the furniture market, we probably need some people that are used to a pace like fashion, because it's a different kind of speed and pace that you're thinking about how you're innovating. So we've really broadened the aperture of how we're looking for talent, but we've also tried to make sure that we're very specific about what do we need skill set wise, and then how are we thinking differently about where we're recruiting that talent from. And that really applies globally, but the problems are different everywhere. If you look at India is a massively growing economy for us. And right now, we're just trying to stay ahead of it. We're trying to get enough people that understand the business, get them trained and developed, and really push forward. Japan's different. North America's different. So we have a unique set of challenges and opportunities with how we bring talent on board everywhere. And I would say one of the biggest advantages we have across the collective is that we have very, very different groups of people solving very different problems in our different brands, and bringing those people together to help us innovate and think differently about problems also kind of opens the talent aperture for us. Because what Roger and his team are doing in Spinning Back Filzfelt, which is kind of small, acoustical, textiles business, versus, what Herman Miller might be working on with the next ergonomic task chair. They're different problems, different customer bases, and being able to share ideas and talent across that membrane in the company is a unique advantage, I think.
This final question I have for you is, the company has such a incredible history. How do you hold on to the past while moving forward? There are lots of companies that sit there and say, hey, the future is there, let's go there. We don't have sort of iconic past that says we've got works of art that we sell. We have the right to sell it. We've got the design to sell it. We want to hold on to that Eames chair that is so iconic that people will spend $7,500 to buy one. And yet at the same time, wanting to move to meeting the demands of the market going forward. That seems to be pretty challenging. For me, I run a firm that was started in 1936, but financial services and the products we sell, it's the money. The money hasn't changed. It's all green. It's just dollars, right? So for my team, what we need to do is understand what's happening in the world today and how our capital meets their needs. And so we're defining what we do every single day, but I don't have that sort of historical, other than being an old firm. I don't have anything that I've got to sort of maintain or hold on to other than the culture. Whereas you have the challenge of both the culture of the firm, but then also certain elements to what you make that root you in the past at the same time as constantly being pushed forward. How do you deal with that tension?
I think the thing that keeps us centered, and I think you said culture is one of the most important things, but really honestly, it's our purpose and our values. When we think about how we're moving into the future, our purpose is still to design for the good of humankind. It's been that way. We hang on to that. It's part of who we are. And across both companies, as we integrated, making sure that we still had that shared purpose that kind of was our why that gets us up out of bed every morning as we kind of lean into the future. That says many things and keeps us anchored and grounded. And when you think about kind of the iconic designs of the past that will still, move with us into the future, we designed those things to last for decades. We designed them to be heirlooms, but we're also always thinking about how do you make them new and what might people want? So we call it the ELO, but the Eames Lounge that you were speaking about, why don't we have that in a vegan leather option? Or, why don't we have an Aeron that's completely sustainable? So we're thinking about how you bring those iconic moments into the future in a way that serves our purpose. And then I think how we really think about our values, how we treat each other. This is a company of very, very different people. We have everyone from our operators on the shop floor that are constantly thinking about how they can do their jobs better, how they can make the best quality, all the way to the guy I was with yesterday who's got a PhD from MIT who's thinking about how we make a better chair tilt and everything in between. So what really keeps us centered and focused on maintaining who we are, which is a design-centric, innovative company that really does design for the good of humankind, really is that, and our values. And then our innovation bent, which is how do we take all those things that make us who we are and make us great, but also think about the problems of tomorrow that we can bring our talents and our strengths to bear to solve. But it's hard. It's hard to balance all those things.
I'll tell you, designing for the better of humankind. That's quite the mission. It's really quite something.
It is.
Thank you. It's been a joy. Really, really great spending an hour with you. I appreciate you sharing your thoughts and insights and your own personal journey. And I wish you great, great success going forward.
Thank you, Willy. It was a treat to get to know you. Appreciate the time.
Thanks. Have a great day.
Thanks. You too. Bye.